Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive made just for you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners on Spotify. Today, we're diving into the Renault Sport Spider. It's a car that, honestly, just thinking about it makes me want to grab my driving gloves and hit the road. We've got a whole stack of articles and data here, and our mission is to figure out what made this car so special, why it still turns heads, and what it tells us about how Renault was thinking back in the day.
Yeah, what's really interesting is the whole scene surrounding the Spider's debut. Picture this. Early 1990s. Renault is just crushing it in Formula One, racking up win after win, but there was this glaring hole in their lineup. They didn't have that flagship sports car, the one that really screams, look what we can do. And then bam, out of nowhere, they dropped this wild card, the Sport Spider, this stripped down, almost bare bones roadster. It felt like the complete opposite of everything Renault was known for.
So it's like, on the one hand, there's this powerhouse in motorsports, but they're everyday cars. They were missing that raw, visceral sports car experience.
Yeah.
And that's where the Sport Spider swoops in, totally defying expectations.
Exactly. And to make things even more intriguing, you got to remember that Renault had just retired the Alpine brand,
Yeah.
famous for those lightweight, nimble sports cars. And guess what? The Spider was actually built in the Dieppe factory, the very same place where Alpine Magic was once created. It's like they were passing the torch, but in a way that nobody saw coming.
So there's a lineage here.
Yeah.
A connection to Alpine.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't exactly shouting it from the rooftops. Some of these articles mentioned that the Spider's design, was inspired by the Alpine A220 Cevennes, that rally car known for its chopped-off rear end. And those 5-spoke wheels. Classic A610.
Yeah.
They even considered putting an Alpine badge on the Spider initially. But in the end, they stuck with Renault Sport.
And that decision really says a lot. They were consciously forging a new identity with the Spider, positioning Renault Sport as this force to be reckoned with, laser-focused on pure performance.
And that performance focus,
Yeah.
it's practically radiating off the Spider's design. This car is a head-turner, low-slung, muscular, with this incredibly minimalist aesthetic. And then get this. They offered it with either a full windshield or just a tiny little windscreen. Talk about making a statement.
It's like they were saying, we're serious about lightweight performance. You want a windshield? Fine. But if you're brave enough, we'll build you the purest driving machine imaginable.
And those Lamborghini-style doors, they definitely add a touch of the exotic.
Absolutely. They scream supercar, even though the Spider wasn't about hitting crazy top speeds.
Now, speak of what's under the hood. We've got this 2.0-liter 16-valve engine, sourced directly from the Clio Williams. That hot hatch with some serious motorsport DNA. They did tweak the exhaust and intake for the Spider, but you're essentially getting that same spirited power plant.
And it delivered some impressive performance. 0 to 100 kilometers in under 7 seconds, top speed. Over 200 kilometers, not bad at all for a car weighing less than a ton.
Yeah, but here's where things get interesting. The sources mentioned that the chassis could easily handle a more powerful engine. There was even talk of a V6 version. What do you think? Why did Renault stick with the 2.0-liter?
That's a really good question, and I think it reveals a lot about what they intended for the Spider. It seems like they were going for a balanced, nimble sports car, one that prioritized handling, the direct connection between car and driver, rather than just raw power. This car was built with the track in mind. It's all about the purity of the driving experience, that feeling of being one with the machine.
Like a finely tuned athlete, lean and agile. Not some bulky muscle car.
Yes, speaking of being in the car, let's climb into the interior.
Well, it's an experience.
Sportin' is a good way to put it. Exposed aluminum, Recaro bucket seats that hug you tight, and absolutely zero frills. No power steering, no ABS, just pure, unfiltered driving.
I love this little detail I found. You could adjust the seat backs, but you needed a screwdriver to do it. And the pedals were depth adjustable too, which is pretty rare. They were obsessed with getting the driving position perfect, even if it meant sacrificing a few creature comforts.
It's fascinating how they put the driving experience above everything else. The options list was incredibly short. An airbag, a radio, maybe a luggage rack. Everything else was stripped away to keep the weight down and maximize that feedback from the car.
And of course, we can't forget the heating system. Let's just say it was a bit, shall we say, unconventional. It basically relied on engine heat. So in the summer, the Spider could turn into a sauna on wheels.
All part of the car's character. This is a machine that demands your attention, makes you work for the thrill of driving it. There's no being passive behind the wheel of a Spider.
Which brings us to the Spider's handling. The sources describe it as lively, nimble, even demanding at times, a car that rewards skilled drivers, but could be a handful for the inexperienced.
Absolutely. That mid-engine layout and near-perfect weight distribution are key here, remember. This car was designed with racing in mind. They even built a dedicated racing version, the Spider Trophy, for a single-make series.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that trophy. It was essentially a stripped-down, track-focused beast. They bumped the power up to 180 HP, added a roll cage, slick tires, the works. The Spider Trophy series was short-lived, but very successful, proving how capable the car was on the track.
And that's what's so fascinating about the Spider. It bridges that gap between road and track so effortlessly, a car you could enjoy on a weekend drive, but also transform into a serious racing machine.
All built on a foundation of lightweight engineering. We talked about the aluminum chassis, but what's interesting is that they decided to weld it rather than bond it, which was unusual back then.
Right, and that was a conscious choice. Welding offered more strength and rigidity.
Right.
Even though it added a bit of weight, they were willing to prioritize performance over absolute lightness.
And the suspension setup was pretty sophisticated too, with double wishbones and a design clearly inspired by racing car technology. No cutting corners here.
Exactly. The Spider was a meticulously engineered machine designed for a precise and engaging driving experience. It wasn't just about looking good. It was about delivering at a high level.
And deliver it did, sadly. The Spider's time was relatively short-lived. They only built a little over 1,700 of them, including those 80 trophy versions. And the windscreen-less version, forget about it. They're incredibly rare and highly sought after today.
And that rarity, combined with the Spider's unique character and its connection to Renault's motorsport heritage, is what makes it such a collector's item. A car that truly stands out from the crowd. A reminder of a time when sports cars were all about purity and the thrill of driving.
A true icon,
Yeah.
even if it flew under the radar for some. Hey, there's much more to this story. We've only just scratched the surface of the Renault Sport Spider. Stay tuned as we dig deeper into the details of this captivating sports car after a quick break.
Looking forward to it. You know, it's fascinating to compare the Spider with some of its contemporaries, especially the Lotus Elise, which debuted not long after. They were both lightweight, minimalist sports cars aimed at purists, but they took slightly different paths to get there.
Oh yeah, the Elise. That thing was even lighter than the Spider, wasn't it? But it also had a less powerful engine. It's almost like a philosophical debate, you know? Less is more versus power with finesse.
Exactly. The Elise, with its composite body and smaller engine, was laser-focused on minimizing weight. It was like a featherweight dancer flitting through corners. The Spider, though, had this more robust, almost muscular feel, not as delicate, but a different kind of driving experience altogether.
And that's where the Spider's personality really shines through. It was a car that demanded your full attention, that rewarded a skilled hand on the wheel. Not just point and shoot, but a dance of finesse and precision.
You're right on the money. And that's a big part of why the Spider still resonates with enthusiasts today. It embodies a kind of pure driving experience that's becoming increasingly rare in our world of electronic aids and driver assists.
Like a throwback to a simpler time, when sports cars were all about mechanical grip and feeling the road, not just horsepower and lap times. But speaking of simpler times, let's rewind a bit and talk about the context of the Spider's launch. This was a period when Renault was really making waves in the automotive world.
Absolutely. The early 90s were a time of significant change for Renault. They were becoming a dominant force in Formula One, and they were eager to translate that success to their road car lineup. The Spider was a key part of that strategy, a way to flaunt their engineering skills and create a halo car for the Renault Sport brand.
And it's interesting that the Spider's debut coincided with the end of the Alpine brand. In a way, it was carrying the torch for French sports car fans, even without wearing the Alpine badge.
That's a perceptive observation. It's as if the Spider inherited the spirit of Alpine, even if it was wearing a different uniform. And that connection is reinforced by the fact that it was built in the very same Dieppe factory, where Alpine had created so much magic over the years.
So there's a lineage, a sense of continuity that goes beyond mere specs. It's about a philosophy, an approach to building sports cars that prioritizes lightweight design, agility, and that visceral connection between driver and machine.
Precisely, and that's what makes the Spider so special. It's a car that speaks to a certain type of driver, someone who values purity and feedback over brute force. You have to work for it, but the reward is much sweeter.
It's a car that makes you feel alive,
Yeah.
connected to the road in a way that few modern sports cars can manage. And that connection is only amplified by the fact that the Spider is such a rare beast. Only a handful were ever produced,
Why?
which makes them even more desirable to collectors and enthusiasts today.
And that rarity adds to the intrigue. It's a car that might have slipped under the radar for many, but for those in the know, it's a hidden gem, a true treasure in the world of classic sports cars.
Makes you wonder, what if? What if Renault had kept developing the Spider, pushed it even further? What if they'd built a more powerful version, a true successor to the Alpine legacy?
Those are tantalizing questions, and unfortunately, we can only speculate. But what we do know is that the Spider, even in its original form, was a remarkable achievement, a car that pushed boundaries, challenged conventions, and ultimately left its mark on automotive history.
It's a reminder that sometimes less is more. That purity and simplicity can be just as captivating as raw power and cutting-edge technology. It makes you want to chuck your phone, grab your driving gloves, and find the nearest winding road.
And that feeling, that pure joy of driving, is something worth holding on to. In a world that's increasingly complex and automated, it's refreshing to come across a car that's so focused, so elemental, so purely about that connection between driver and machine.
And that purity of purpose is reflected in so many of the Spider's design details, some of which we haven't even touched on yet. Take, for instance, the way the suspension is mounted directly to the chassis using spherical bearings, just like in a race car. No rubber bushings to soften the feedback, just pure, unfiltered information flowing from the road to the driver's fingertips.
It's like they were obsessed with stripping away anything unnecessary, anything that might dilute the driving experience. And that philosophy extended to the interior as well. There wasn't even a proper glove box, just a tiny, open compartment, barely big enough for a pair of sunglasses.
And then there are the infamous V's-adjustable seat backs. Imagine that, needing a screwdriver just to adjust your seat angle. It's almost funny. But it also highlights the Spider's uncompromising nature. This wasn't a car built for lounging. It was built for driving.
It was like a finely tuned instrument, a precision tool that demanded a skilled hand to operate. But for those who could master it, the rewards were immense. The sources describe the Spider's handling as nothing short of magical. Incredible grip, balance, and responsiveness.
And all that magic, that responsiveness, it all comes down to the engineering that went into the Spider. Remember, this car was developed by the same team that was behind Renault's Formula One success. They took that racing knowledge and applied it to create a road car that delivered a truly exceptional driving experience.
Yeah, and they didn't skimp on materials either. The Spider's chassis was made entirely of aluminum, which was a pretty exotic choice back then. They even used aluminum for the suspension arms, which helped to reduce the unsprung weight. You know, that's the weight of the components not supported by the suspension, like the wheels and brakes. Lighter unsprung weight means the suspension can react more quickly to bumps and dips, leading to even better handling.
It all comes back to that lightweight philosophy, that obsession with shedding every unnecessary gram. And it really shows in the way the car performs. It's incredibly nimble and responsive, with a real sense of urgency in the way it accelerates and changes direction.
For enthusiasts like yourself, it's that blend of lightweight design, agility, and driver involvement that makes the Spider so appealing. It captures the essence of pure sports car driving, harking back to a time when it was all about skill and a finesse, rather than brute force and technology.
It makes you want to ditch the screens, grab your driving gloves, and head for the nearest mountain pass. It's a car that makes you feel truly connected to the road in a way that few modern cars can.
A true driver's car, in every sense of the word. And unfortunately, they're a dying breed. But thankfully, we have cars like the Renault Sport Spider to remind us that the joy of driving, that visceral connection, can never be truly extinguished. It just takes a special kind of car to rekindle that flame.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the Renault Sport Spider, I'm left wondering, what would the automotive landscape look like today if more manufacturers embraced this philosophy? Could a car like this even exist in today's world, with all the safety regulations and emission standards?
That's a great question, and it's definitely worth thinking about. Perhaps a car like the Spider, in its purest form, would struggle to meet modern requirements. But the philosophy, the focus on driver engagement and lightweight design, those are principles that can still be applied, even in a more technologically advanced era. Maybe that's the real legacy of the Renault Sport Spider. A reminder that the joy of driving is something worth fighting for, something worth preserving, even as the automotive world continues to evolve.
A huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the Renault Sport Spider. We hope you enjoyed learning about this fascinating car as much as we did. And remember, there's a new episode of Vintage Car Chronicles waiting for you every day on Spotify. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories from the golden age of motoring. Until next time, happy listening.